When the Night Comes Out presents The Hive, Part 8. Reg knew that he was almost out of ammo. He could tell by how light the rifle felt. Once the bullets were gone, he had his knife, but he didn't think he could hold these guys off for very long with that. How had there gotten to be so many of them? There were maybe 20 left, all prisoners and guards combined. He had lost far too many along the way, fighting their way along the hallway, grabbing as many prisoners as they could. They fired, and the ghouls fell and fell, but somehow there were always more to take their place. Reg's group was so close to their destination. They were near to where the big metal doors could close and seal off this entire wing. Reg was sure that he could seal off more of the air shafts, and maybe that could keep the ghouls in this area. Where was Q? That was the one thing nagging inside his brain. They had lost him and not been able to find him. However, they had also not seen him among the snarling, toothy beasts that were swarming them and attacking them with a mindless relentlessness that was exhausting. If he was not among them, then where was he? If they closed the doors, they were sealing Q up in here with these things. Still, Reg thought, when you had to make the tough decisions, this was what they were talking about. The rest of the Hive and Hive City was at stake. Reg raised his rifle and fired, sending another bullet into the head of yet another of these things. The head exploded and the body fell. Then he aimed and fired again. Wash, rinse, repeat, he thought, as he raised his rifle and fired again and again. "I'm out of ammo," one of his guards said just to his left. "Use your knife," Reg said, struggling to keep the calm in his voice that he was known for. "Stab the fuckers in the head." There was a groan from the guard, and his rifle clattered to the ground and the knife unsheathed. Funny how your senses could be so heightened during a situation like this one. The prisoners were all carrying hand weapons, but they were still in the middle with a perimeter of guards around them. That band of guards had gotten much smaller, and more than a few of the prisoners had engaged the enemy hand-to-hand, and a couple of them had been lost too. When Reg looked over the crowd of surging ghouls, he could see his guards that had been bitten, their helmets making them stand out from the crowd. More than a few times he had had to shoot someone he knew. Yes, he was a guard, and most of these things were prisoners, but it was impossible not to know faces, exchange a few names when you lived this close to people for so long. It was still odd to have to shoot someone that you knew, no matter how dead they already were. "We're almost out," Reg called, glancing over his shoulder and finding the track that the metal doors took when they closed. "Just a few more yards. Keep it up." His men began to move with a renewed vigor at that announcement. The ghouls themselves attacked in waves. They would circle around and around as if looking for a weak point, and then they would rush forward and try to break through the wall of guards and guns. Then they would pull away and circle. Reg and his men had taken to trying to pick off as many of them as they could when they were circling. Reg kept moving sideways, moving, firing, taking each shot deliberately. Then they attacked in a swarm again. One of his guards let out a scream, and he saw out of the corner of his eye the man get dragged into the mass of creatures, arms flailing, but blood already flying into the air as the ghouls bit and tore. Then one of the prisoners was grabbed from behind. The ghoul bit into the man's neck. More blood spurted and spattered on the floor. The prisoners in the middle fell on the ghoul, driving spikes and shivs and knives into the thing's head. There were more to take the place of that one, however. Reg fired, aimed, fired. Each time another ghoul fell, it was from a bullet in their head. He was getting damn good at this, he thought crazily. Perhaps he could take the sniper test again. Something grabbed his right arm at the elbow, and it threw off his aim, and the bullet went wide. He felt pressure above his elbow and turned to see one of the ghouls biting his arm. The teeth could not get through the pad of armor he wore there. Reg let out a cry of disgust and kicked out, pushing the ghoul away. The ghoul staggered back and then lunged again. Reg swung the butt of his rifle and cracked the thing in the head. Then he swung the gun around and fired up into the thing's chin. Blood and brains flew from the thing's head, and then it went down. Then something else jumped on his back, and he could feel the teeth trying to bite at his neck. Reg let out a yell and began to turn in a circle, reaching up to grab at the thing on his back, turning and twirling in an attempt to keep the thing off balance and prevent the teeth from biting. He grabbed the rifle and swung the butt again, felt it crack against something, and then the thing was off his back. Reg whirled and fired a bullet point blank into the thing's head. Reg looked up. They were past the point of the doors. "Push them back!" he screamed, raising his gun to fire again. "Push them back!" The prisoners and remaining guards gave him a moment's look as if he were crazy, and then they all seemed to realize where they were. They fought, pushed, fired, stabbed, bludgeoned, and shoved the ghouls back behind where the track was. "Kettinger!" Reg screamed, fatigue and stress making him forget to address his boss in the formal way he usually did. Close the doors to M-Wing, now! Hurry!" There was no argument from Kettinger. Instead, a loud metallic screech filled the air, and the huge, thick metal doors began to close. Reg and his men and the prisoners set up a line just outside of the track the doors took and fought the ghouls as they tried another attack, reaching for them. One of the prisoners fought, but was grabbed by several of them and yanked through and lost into the crowd of ghouls, his screams fading fast. Reg finally ran out of bullets and joined the fray, swinging his rifle like a club, using all of his strength to crack open the skulls of anything with sharp, pointed teeth that came at them. It seemed to take an eternity for the doors to close. When they got close, the ghouls let out their trademark screech and surged, trying to cram through the narrowing slit between the doors. 3 of them were sliced in half when the doors slammed shut, the top halves of their bodies clawing forward, their hands digging into the floor and pulling forward as their entrails dragged behind them, their teeth gnashing. Reg and his men finished them off with blows to the head. Then there was silence. The pounding from the ghouls on the metal doors muffled by the thickness of them. Reg bent over and breathed deep, his hands on his knees. He felt dizzy for a moment. Where was Q? The demons burst in and charged at him without hesitation. Q did his best to stay calm, regulating his heart and breathing like he heard somewhere that you were supposed to do when you wanted to take careful aim. Yeah, he thought, but I bet the person who came up with that never had to fight a horde of charging zombie demons. He aimed at the ones coming through the main door first. Point, shoot. Point, shoot. 1 in the head, then 2, then 3. He heard a noise to his right and pivoted, swinging the barrel around. There was one, all pointed teeth and gaping maw, almost on him, and he shot it through the mouth. Then shot the one behind that one in the forehead. He heard another noise, a kind of snarling, gargling sound from his left, and he pivoted again. Another one, a woman, probably a nurse, was swallowing his elbow. He yanked it away before the dual rows of sharp, pointed teeth could come down on him and shot her through the eye. Then he shot another, a prisoner, through his eye. Q was sweating, and they were upon him. They were going to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. He heard a sound and saw more of their number piling through the open front door. He saw that several of them wore guard uniforms. He tried to see if Reg was among them, but they covered him too fast, and he couldn't tell for sure. The rest of the bullets in the rifle went fast. He managed to fire each of them and managed to score a headshot with each last bullet. He had managed to kill about a dozen of them, but there were dozens more. He reached down and grabbed his crude spear and lashed out with a yell, driving the pointed metal end into the chin of another of the ghouls. The pointed metal drove all the way up into the thing's skull. He felt arms and hands grabbing at him from behind as he tried to work the spear loose. He worked it loose and then used it to smash another in the side of the head. Then he drove forward and got another one through its left eye. He kicked out with his left leg to push 3 of them that had bunched up near his side away from him. He felt their fingers grasping at his pants. He worked the spear loose and whirled around, driving forward, stabbing another one in the head. His arms already ached. He was breathing hard. They, on the other hand, never tired and never pulled a muscle. They were relentless and kept coming and coming. It was hopeless. Q felt it in his gut. He knew that this was a possibility, but facing it was more terrifying than he realized it would be. Q let out another yell, hoping in some dim part of his brain that this sounded intimidating. If any of the ghouls were intimidated, they didn't show it. They just kept coming, charging at him. He worked the spear loose again and speared another, but now he was backing up, backing towards his room and his place of safety. He was thinking of the reinforced door and how that would hold them off. The room was free of air shafts, too. He would be able to hold up there and get in touch with Mike, and they would send in the National fucking Guard and get him out of there. He speared another, then another, aiming for the head, hitting one in the shoulder. This one was a former guard that Q recognized. The guard ghoul snarled at him, showing the teeth, and yanked the spear out of Q's hand. God damn it! Q turned and ran. He heard the feet of the dozens of the creatures running at him, snarling, making strange noises. Noises that sounded to Q like hunger. Intense, burning, and constant hunger. He made it into the doorway, whirled around, and slammed the door. He caught a hand in the door, the bloody digits clawing at the air and reaching for him. He pushed harder, throwing his weight against the door, and the hand severed, falling to the floor where it twitched and grabbed at the air. The door slammed shut. Q threw the lock. Then he backed away. The door rattled in its frame. The frame was reinforced too, however, and held. Q hoped the walls would hold. Had they reinforced the walls around the door? Would the drywall or sheetrock or whatever the flying fuck the wall that held the door and its frame give way? He could hear them out there, slobbering and drooling and snapping at the wood. He heard their ragged fingernails across the wood, tearing out splinters on the other side. But the door was holding. Dear God, please let it hold. Q backed into the room until he could reach the phone on the wall. He picked it up and dialed buttons. He held it to his head, breathing hard, sweat and blood running down his forehead in rivulets. The other end of the phone rang once, and then there was a voice.
Yeah?
Mike, it's Q, he said.
Q, thank God. Where the fuck are you? I just heard from Reg. He's out of the wing and we closed the metal doors. They lost a bunch of his men and a bunch of prisoners, but we got another whole bunch out. I'm about to head to the cafeteria to see what's up. Can you meet me there?
Q cleared his throat and almost laughed. Mike was still trying to control things, make a plan, get the issue resolved. I don't think so, Mike. I kinda got separated from the group. I had to run back to the hospital. I'm locked in one of the rooms with the reinforced doors. There are dozens of these things out there pounding on the door and trying to get in. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. Q thought for a moment that the connection had been lost.
Jesus, Q,
Mike said quietly.
Okay, I'll get Reg and put a raiding team together. We'll head down there and burst you out. Hold tight.
No, Q shouted before Mike could hang up the phone. Don't do that. I'll be fine for a while. Hell, maybe even days as long as I have water. If you send another team down here, you'll just lose more men. You need to get together with some people and come up with a plan. You have them contained, so figure out a way to wipe them all out at once. When that's done, you can come get me. Another long pause.
Jesus.
Trust me, Mike. I don't like it any better than you do, but it's got to happen. We're going to be out of guards, and we cannot afford to lose Reg.
Sit tight, Q. Stay alive, you asshole.
Then he was gone. The silence was terrifying, and Q had never felt more alone in his entire life. He moved towards a small desk where the nurses tending the patient in this room would make notes in their chart and sat down. He rolled all the way to the wall. He held the metal spear in his right hand. Outside, the hands clawed at the door, fists pounded, and it went on and on and on. Then, as Q watched, he saw the doorknob twitch in the doorframe. It went left and right, and the door shook. They had just tried the doorknob. What the hell? Q closed his eyes and wiped his forehead and began to pray. Kettinger was wearing a hole in the rug between the window that overlooked the hive and the bank of monitors along the wall. Right now, that bank of monitors, one of the things he had always been so fond of, was useless. All of the action was taking place in a section of the prison that had had those cameras disabled somehow. When the phone rang and it was Reg, he breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, he thought during that moment it took to cross the room, pick up the phone, and put that phone to his ear, some good news. The news was good that Reg was still alive, but not so good when he heard that there were now more of these ghoul things and that he had lost more guards. His heart sank into his shoes when Reg told him that Q was not among the survivors and he had no idea where the man was. Kettinger put the phone down and then grabbed his vest, the rest of his gear, and headed for the cafeteria. Jennifer trailed behind him, telling him over and over again that he should stay at the command center. He finally just told her to shut up and either stay there and monitor things herself or put on some tactical gear and come with him. The cafeteria was only seldom used by prisoners. It was on the lower floor of the administration building and was normally used by the staff. However, some prisoners who had proven trustworthy were allowed to congregate there, mostly the trustees. Whenever that happened, the workers in the building were cleared out and the trustees ate under heavy guard, but it was still a welcome relief from being served their meals in their cells. Kettinger was halfway there when his phone started going off. He had no idea what the number was, but he had hope that it was Q. When he heard Q's voice, he was relieved and felt that maybe things were not spinning out of control. Then Q gave him the news that he was trapped inside the medical ward and that seemingly hundreds of the ghouls were all over the door. Kettinger cursed when he hung up and began jogging to the cafeteria. He had to make a plan. He was the kind of guy who planned things, and he had to save the hive. He was not going to let everyone inside this thing die or turn into one of those things with the pointed teeth and decaying flesh. When he reached the cafeteria, his heart sank. The men that were there were obviously in no condition for another fight. The guards that remained, and there were so few of them, were tired, bloody, and worn out. The prisoners were no better off, and all of them looked terrified. Even Reg, good old dependable and reliable Reg, looked completely exhausted when Kettinger found him sitting on one of the tables in a far corner. "Reg?" Kettinger asked. Reg raised his head and looked at Kettinger. The haunted look in the man's eyes froze Kettinger's blood. "It was awful, boss," Reg said in a voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea how bad it was, and those things are still in there and can still use the air shafts." They had already lost one entire wing of the prison to those things. The reality of that statement slammed home in Kettinger's mind. He had lost a part of his prison to some weird disease that turned people into slavering monsters. It was unreal. "I heard from Q," Kettinger said. "He made it back to the hospital, and he's locked in one of those rooms with the reinforced doors. He's completely trapped." Reg studied Kettinger's face for several moments. "I don't think I can go back in there, boss," Reg said. "There will be more of them by now. Look at the prisoners we got back. That's not even half of the prisoners that are housed down there. We got a lot out, but the numbers of zombies got so bad we had to just run." Kettinger could tell that this bothered Reg. Reg had been forced to choose who would live and who was left to their fate. It was a decision that he was never supposed to have to make. It was going to tear him apart. "We have to save the hive, Reg," Kettinger said, reaching out a hand and placing it on the other man's shoulder. "We have to save Hive City, and we have to stop these things." "They move so fast," Reg said. "They started out slow, but they seemed to gain strength from each person that they turned. Now they just overwhelm you with sheer numbers. One bite and that's it. How do we defeat something like that?" Kettinger sighed and moved away from the spot where Reg sat. He thought of Jenny and of all of the people in the administration building. He thought of the remaining guards, all of them probably willing to throw themselves into the battle to save the hive. He thought of the remaining prisoners, hundreds of them. They were just sitting in their cells and waiting for the air vents to crash open and the snarling, biting, decaying things to come pouring in and tear them apart. No, it had to stop, and it had to stop now. Right now, they were contained within one section of the prison, and they had to find a way to stop them now. But the prison was not equipped to deal with this. If the reports were true and the things were dead already, then how could they use gas and all of the other things they had installed to prevent riots from actual living people? There was no way to deal with ghouls or zombies. He had to kill or destroy hundreds of things that were already apparently dead. There was only one person he could think of that might have the ability to come up with a plan to destroy hundreds of creatures so completely that they could not come back and tear the rest of them apart. Just one person who knew how to make explosives and gas and other things of sheer terror and horror that somehow were even more scary than the hundreds of ghouls currently in the Hive's bowels. Just one person. "Get me Dalton King," Kettinger said. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, The Hive. Tune in next time for The Hive, Part 9. Written by Brian W. Alaspa. Narrated and produced by Ali James. Music by Vivek Abhishek. Catch up on the first 4 seasons of When the Night Comes Out now. Support us on Patreon for more terrifying content.